So, all right. So now we get down to the stuff we've missed. So, last time you heard from us, it was well. Also, there was no video, so that's changed now. There's video now. You can see us. But also, the entire Pac-12 is disintegrating. By the day, what are we at? Like the 6th alternative deadline for when they're gonna announce the media deal? Any day now. Any day now.
Well, literally, this is also 1 year anniversary of the Pac-12 announcing that they were, accelerating the media rights negotiation after USC was announced to the Big Ten.
I've heard so many things from, it's this number to no, actually it's this number to it's 7 to it's all streaming to 70% streaming to it's this network, no, it's this network, no, it's this combination. And I've heard it's coming this day, it's coming. I have heard so many different things on this. It's actually absolutely crazy. So I think the question you have here is Big Ten expansion, or so University of Washington / Oregon versus Stanford. So again, I think the premise is this is not going well for the Pac-12. Well,
correct.
Pac-12, we should barely call them that. It's mostly Pac-10 at this point. Basically, there is the opportunity for one conference, if not many conferences, to basically steal teams from the Pac-12 or what's left of it, scavenge it. I think what is the best target here for the Big Ten, I guess? The SEC, I think, is they're not particularly interested in adding a team on the other side of the country, and nor do they really need to. I think they're just going to kind of wait until they can get Clemson. Because the thing is, if you're looking at pillaging other conferences, the SEC is right there on the ACC. If the ACC blows up, they can just add most of the ACC or the best teams in the ACC, and then they're good. I think Clemson, Florida State, Miami would be easy targets. But I think the Big Ten is more interested in it. So, in your opinion, what are the better targets for the Big Ten?
Well, let me kind of frame it in a strange way, because you hear a lot of discussion in terms of 5 years down the road. Well, at that point, Oregon and Washington might just jump to the Big Ten, and I just don't see that happening. And I thought, I could just go through a list of reasons why, and then I thought it'd be even more interesting just to kind of put in a context of we do these two teams, Oregon and Washington, against admitting Stanford to the Big Ten, just to kind of illustrate some, my thinking here. So I've got them in 3 areas: media, geographic, and academic. So under media, number one, media rights revenue. There's been a lot of numbers kicked around in terms of the next Pac-12 deal. Let's say it sounds like it's going to be maybe 25 or 30 million per team per year. Let's go with 30 to be generous. Let's say that Oregon and Washington are well above that. And let's say that, they're worth 40 million a year. Okay. Let's say that Stanford is well below that and they're only worth 20 million a year, half. If you do the math, basically the current Big Ten deal is 70 million per team per year. Once SC and UCLA go aboard, it'll actually be more dilutive to add Oregon and Washington than if you just add Stanford, because you've got 2 teams that are actually diluting combined more than one team is diluting by itself, if that makes sense. So vote against Oregon and Washington. I think if any program that is interested in media rights, which is basically all of them, would vote in favor of Stanford. There's an Eastern time zone issue. I wouldn't have thought about this, but I'm a nerd, so I listen to a lot of sports media podcasts, and one of them said, the Big Ten is kind of concerned about. They love the concept of the big noon kickoff, but it's kind of a hot potato that nobody wants more than once, if that makes sense. To your point about expansion, I think that they really want to solve this, and if they're going to expand, get somebody in the East Coast, the Eastern time zone. I've actually read that in a couple of accounts on Twitter too. So that's basically a strike against all 3 of these: Oregon, Washington, and Stanford. The other side of that is, go ahead. Did you have a thought?
Well, I mean, there's not many teams on the East that they'd be interested in, with the exception of maybe Notre Dame. That's about it, right? There's nothing.
Let's come back to that at the end. This is interesting. Okay. You've got the other side of that is the Pacific time zone issue. There's not really a window that the Big Ten is looking to fill up more with West Coast programs. That's just kind of not in their TV deal, and I don't think they're interested in expanding the Big Ten network too much to make a late night spot that kind of exists sometimes and sometimes doesn't. So adding any of these teams really creates a problem in that regard in terms of the Pacific time zone teams. You've got your smaller programs currently in the Big Ten. If you look at the windows that are on the next deal, you're going to have, there's 3 big windows: Fox morning, CBS late afternoon or morning for us people on the West Coast. We'll use East time zone. Fox noon, CBS 3:30, NBC prime time, right? Then you've got the Big Ten is going to carry the rest of the games. That's a limited number of windows, and so whatever the Big Ten can't carry is going to be pushed out to Peacock. You've got your smaller programs are only worried about, I'm going to be forced to Peacock 3 or 4 times a year. I don't want that. They're not going to want Washington and Oregon, who are going to be more attractive than a Purdue or an Indiana. They're going to push these programs to Peacock more. So you've got these smaller programs are incented to not have an Oregon or a Washington. Going back to the media rights revenue, I think that, you mentioned what a disaster that the media rights is doing. I've seen a couple of different iterations where, and it seems likely that most of their programming is not going to be on linear TV. It's going to be on a streaming service, which the latest is it's going to be Pac-12 is going to be its own streaming service. Good luck.
Wow.
What's going to happen
is
is
get any money
if
for
this
that.
runs
Wow,
its
that's
full.
crazy.
Yeah. They have they still have the channel, so it kind of makes sense that, okay, they don't have to divest of all this infrastructure to run the channel. But I don't know what they'll get, from pipeline revenue. But I bring that up because, you get a full another contract deal here. It's 4 or 5 years, and you have Washington and Oregon in that. Out of sight, out of mind. After that, they're just going to be less visible, and they're going to command less media rights revenue going forward. So that's all under media. Geographically, travel. If you do the math, despite what the idiot president at Northwestern says, he says, well, if we add more teams, then it takes care of the travel issue. No, it doesn't, ding dong. If you look at right now, USC and UCLA, between the two of them for football, they require the rest of the conference to make 8 trips to the West Coast. If you add just Stanford, that number increases to 12. You've actually increased the number of trips that the teams need to make to the West Coast. If you add Oregon and Washington, that increases to 15. So you've almost doubled the amount of travel to the West Coast that your Central and East Coast time zone programs have to do. So I'll just say Northwestern president, who actually was the president of Oregon, I'll just say he's probably not good at math or he's too busy to check his staff's work. But, this is not a creative. Next under geographic is a talent and recruiting base. If I look at Stanford versus Oregon and Seattle, way more talent that I want to recruit out of the Bay Area than those others. The Bay Area is not great, but there's more top level stars that come out of the Bay Area than Washington and Oregon. So if I'm the Big Ten, I definitely want to have the Bay Area in my footprint rather than Oregon and Washington. And it's also interesting. Ohio State's pulled they pulled out Ebuka and Tuimoloau, if I said that right, from the state of Washington. They don't need more of a footprint. They like a guy there, they get him. Easy peasy. Similarly, in the recruiting geographic considerations, the way it'll be next year, basically USC is going to have first dibs on every 5-star in the Pacific time zone because they're going to want to be on TV. They're not going to want to be on streaming, and they probably want to stay local now that there's an actual coach at USC. They would absolutely veto having, Oregon and Washington, especially Oregon, because they recruit so well and they have tremendous resources. Why would they want to split that? It's strategically, they're going to be in such a great position. I've read a couple of, pieces about it. It's already showing, that there's just kids that, before Riley, and especially now with this new deal, that would have considered Oregon that just, Oregon's just not able to get in on now. And then lastly, under geographic, the alumni base. This was interesting, and there was some account on Twitter that I follow that actually made a good point about this. And this explains some other really kind of weird stuff in terms of expansion. We always think about, why is Maryland and why is Rutgers a part of the Big Ten? What a mistake. Well, the thing is, they have huge alumni bases from all the Big Ten colleges in DC and in basically, the tri-state area of New York. So it's one of those soft benefits where, definitely they've seen an increase in fundraising from alumni in the area. There's just more engagement when, your team comes out and, it's kind of not fair to Rutgers, but, if you can get a bunch of Ohio State alums just to, go to Rutgers and watch a game there, or, Michigan alums in DC to watch them play Maryland, great. They're more engaged, and they've actually literally seen an increase in fundraising from those alumni bases. I bring that up because the amount of Big Ten alumni in the Bay Area is basically 5 or 6 times more than Washington and Oregon combined. So, any responses on that? Any pushback? Yes, no?
Yeah. So that's a lot of things to discuss there. Yeah, I mean, I broadly agree with pretty much all those points. I will say that the one thing is that the Big Ten, I feel like, and I think a lot of people also view this as well, there is, I think, to some extent, obviously, compared to the SEC, there is kind of this dearth of really good programs. I mean, okay, we're not knocking Ohio State here, not knocking Michigan and Penn State and Michigan, but okay, so you've got Ohio State, you've got Michigan, you've got Penn State sometimes, you've got Michigan State a couple times. You're not calling Purdue an elite school. We're not talking there is a kind of lack of top schools. Now, okay, obviously currently we're adding USC. Okay, good. UCLA sometimes okay. Stanford is going to be kind of that. It's going to fit right in there with that Michigan with the Maryland, Rutgers, Northwestern. They're going to fit right there with them. Oregon, Washington would be. It would basically create a tougher conference strength of schedule. Now, I don't think that's necessarily going to be an issue because we're now seeing, and you're very clearly seeing there is 2 super conferences basically, and I think they are one of those super conferences. So I don't think they're necessarily, and this is something the SEC could probably start looking at too, in the fact that and you're already seeing that when they decide not to go for the 19 conference schedule, they decide to go to this weird 8-1 for a year. There is concerns that, hey, we're going to cannibalize ourselves, and not necessarily for the top teams. The top teams are still going to win their games, but Missouri, your Mississippi State, your Ole Miss, they're like, hey, guess what? We're not going to get to go to a bowl every other year now because we got a rough schedule that year, right? So I think these are some of the concerns with these teams, and I'm not. It's going to depend on what the Big Ten is going to want to do. The fact of not being on streaming, the problem isn't necessarily the streaming. It's the fact that it's hard for people to watch. What streaming service is it going to be on, right? If it was on Netflix, it'd be like, yeah, sure, that's great. But it's not going to be on Netflix. It's not going to be on Disney Plus. It's not going to be on Amazon. It's going to be on something random. If the Pac-12 makes it, and if the Pac-12 makes their own media streaming app and says you have to pay $12, no one is going to do that. That's the problem, and this is what we're seeing now. And you're seeing now all these people are cutting the cord, and because this has been the trend. Everybody's like, oh, everybody's cutting the cord. They're getting rid of their cable package. Well, then, okay, so you got rid of your $80 a month cable package. Now you got to subscribe to Netflix. That's $20. You got to subscribe to Disney. The problem is this stuff is starting to add up, and people are like, yeah, okay, we did this to save money, not spend more money, right? It's so this is the problem. There's not going to be an appetite to be like, I'm going to pay $12 or whatever a month to watch 13 games a week, 13 games through the season, and because
be more specific. To see Arizona State play Washington State.
Yeah, it's only going to be those super diehard fans. If you're a general fan on the West Coast, there's no guarantee that the game that you're going to want to see is going to be on that streaming service. It could and it's probably not even going to be. The premier games are still going to be on TV, right? You could be if you're a general college football fan, I'm an Oregon fan, but I'm not a super fan. I don't need to see every game. There are people who are and I think you kind of fall more into that. You want to see every single USC game. but there's a lot of people who are just like, I just like college football, right? And there's a couple of games that interest me a week, and I'm like, I want to see that game, I want to see that game, I want to see that game. Like, I mean, here's the thing: maybe that game that I want to see could be on Pac-12 streaming app, on currently untitled Pac-12 streaming app. Maybe it's not going to be. Maybe it could be, right? So,
Yeah.
that's a huge barrier to that as well. The
Yeah. I
geographic,
think.
oh, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. No, just I
Okay,
want to get into
so
geographic in a second, but just to tie that up, I consider myself to be a super fan. My favorite outside of USC, my favorite series of plays to watch was literally a Conference USA game in Charlotte versus UTEP when Charlotte gave up like 50 points in like 10 minutes or something. It was great. I love to watch football. I love to watch college football. I love it. And if I'm doubtful to get the Pac-10 streaming app, I think they're way, way, way overestimating the subscribers that they'll get. Way overestimating.
well, okay, okay. Let me ask you that question then. Let's say USC didn't leave the Pac-12. Would you get? And this is now where
I would
you
have
get
to.
it?
Yeah.
You'd have to. Okay.
But here's the thing. Yeah. Just you've got the biggest program with the most fans.
Exactly.
That's the thing. And what's left over, just, Oregon has a lot of diehards, and yeah, they'll bring in subscribers, as will Washington. But the other ones, like Washington State, they're like USC basketball. They have diehard fans. There's just not a lot of them. They're not going to bring in, 500,000 people. They're going to bring in just, tens of thousands at most. And you have that, at a lot of other programs.
Well, this is why you made the case for Stanford, and we'll get to the geographic here. It's number of people, right? I mean, you've got USC and UCLA. That basically Los Angeles County alone is like 25 million people, I think. Or no, no, it's a massive population in LA County, right? And then
Yeah.
you've got Orange County right beside there. There's another couple million there. Like the area around USC and UCLA is millions and millions of people, and
Yeah.
obviously you go Stanford, that's the Bay Area, another couple million people. Oregon, I mean, okay, there's like 5-6 million people in the state of Oregon. Great, good for them, but that's nothing compared to the Bay Area or the southern. Again, same thing with Washington. Okay, a lot of people around Seattle, but not that many compared to again a lot of those teams in California. So this is where I think a lot of them are like, this is why they're focusing on those teams, and there's not this rush to add Oregon and Washington.
Yeah.
I will randomly defend the Northwestern athletic director, because I think if they were to add other West Coast teams, if they were to add random other West Coast teams,
you'd have to get to like 6.
Yeah, but like they could maybe like be like, oh, they're their own super division thing. Like they could do some sort of weird contrived thing they could, like, again, it wouldn't be a fair system, but like they could make up their own rules, be like, oh, this is what we're gonna do now to fix. Like, it's dumb, but whatever. Like they could do whatever they want, I guess, because they're. But like it's dumb. It's not. It doesn't make sense, but.
But then you would get to the networks would say, no, I didn't pay to see USC and Oregon pay twice. I'm paying to see USC play at Penn State. That's where you're getting this enormous contract. So I think there'd be some pushback there.
Mm-hmm. I guess you could theoretically like make all the. Yeah, they could probably do something to make all the permanent opponents. So like that knocks off 3 USC games, but then yeah, you're right. Then that's less USC Ohio State, USC Michigan, USC Penn State, right? That's what people want to see, right? I mean, I'm excited for USC Ohio State. Yeah, I'm excited for USC Ohio State next year.
I can't wait to see like when they play Iowa.
Yeah, that too. But like. Yeah, like I'm really excited for this. It's great, and that's the thing. In terms of academics is weird. I guess Stanford is probably among a better academic institution. Northwestern is too. There's these weird arguments about research dollars, but at the end of the day, this is about tens and tens of millions of dollars, in some cases hundreds of millions of dollars. I don't think they're necessarily going to be like, oh, but they're better at cancer research. It's like, no. This is about this is about media deals and population centers. And I think you could say, oh, we added Stanford for academic reasons, when it's like, oh, they're from the Bay Area where there's more people than in Eugene, Oregon, right? So I think that's the.
Well, I'll put it this way. What you say, I think this might be where where the presidents might push back some. Because the presidents who have to buy off on these, I think this is where they're going to have a little bit of a concern, I guess I would say, or just be more interested. So I've got some numbers here. So I use the Wall Street Journal rankings because I think the U.S. News ones have been completely debunked. Um, the Big Ten right now, the median Wall Street Journal ranking, once they add USC and UCLA, will be 80th in the country.
That's academically, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They just added, or they're in the process of adding within a year, USC and UCLA ranked 19th and 27th. Washington is ranked 47th. Oregon is 241. That's a big hurdle. Stanford is 2. And just to come back to this is, I think that's an much easier sell. And I'd say we come back to, the points that you made earlier about the East Coast, when I brought up the East Coast issue. I think that Stanford, there's 2 programs that they could easily pair up with that fit academically, and they solve that East Coast time zone. Number 1 is Notre Dame. Notre Dame would go back to being playing, a couple times a year early. They used to do it, no big deal. I think they get, they only put up lights in there, I think, maybe 10 years ago in their stadium or something like that. So they can be the big noon kickoff, which would be fine. The other one would be Miami. Miami is a very highly rated academic institution. And you take Miami and all the media market, and especially the recruiting base and the alumni base. I mean, home run, home run, home run in those 3 versus, Oregon and Washington. And then you pair them with a Stanford. I think actually Miami makes the most sense. And to that point, you mentioned this earlier, the ACC, I don't know who knows this, but ACC is stuck in their current deal until 2035. Why would I hurry and just kind of add Oregon and Washington? I want to see what's left of the ACC. I want that to explode first, because it's not going to survive its current deal, or it will survive it won't survive past its current deal.
Well, there is a theoretical. I think you can theoretically. Yes. You can if half the conference votes to dissolve the conference, you can theoretically do it. But the problem is the fact that it's like, okay, we're all now gonna do everybody's for themselves, and I don't think half the conference is like, I am comfortable in the situation. There's 6 teams that are comfortable in that, but I think that the ACC has 14 teams. I think
14 teams. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's 6 teams that are like, I'm good, and the other 8 teams are like, I am not good with this situation, because they're like, I don't know which conference I'm going to go to. So you've got to somehow convince, and I think there will be a check sent to some school somewhere, or someone will be offered I think at some point, once the dust settles with the Pac-12 and with the Big Ten, I would not be surprised if the SEC and the Big Ten or someone mediate something where 6 people are sent an invite to either the Big Ten or the SEC, or it'd be actually exactly 7 people. 4 people are going to get some invite to someone are going to get sent an SEC invite, some are going to be sent a Big Ten invite, and then that's going to be it. It's going to be done. And I think, or some number of it, right? Whatever the half number is, half plus 1. But that's going to, and it's once you get that number, it's going to be the 7 or 8 biggest schools. And then once that happens, then the entire ACC is going to blow up. And I don't know what's going to happen after that. And we can guess which schools it's going to be. But once that happens, then I think you have an argument for. And I think then Notre Dame's going to have to make a decision somewhere too. And then you're going to end up with 2 20-team conferences. So
yeah, I think to that point, 2 things. Number 1, of that 6 that say they're good with it, I think that probably 3 or 4 are actually good with it. And the other 2 or 3 are saying they're good with it just because they're demanding more money. But I don't know if they're really comfortable that they would land in a great spot should the conference dissolve.
Well, this is the thing, right? Because they I think over the summer, they've now decided they're not doing unequal revenue sharing, which is going to be based off of success on the field.
Yeah.
The problem is that if you're Miami, you're not particularly happy with that after this last year. And the thing is, all it's going to take is a couple of these schools to have a bad year, and they're going to be like, well, we had a rough year because this coach was bad or something happened or our star quarterback got injured, and now we're getting less money than this other school that is much smaller than us. And I think this patches together for a couple of years probably, and that's it. And it's, again, once you start seeing the Big Ten and the SEC deals take off, that's when there's going to be problems here. And I think it's only a matter of time before 8 teams are slipped an invitation. If you can secure landing spots for 8 of the teams, it's over. They're going to vote to dissolve the conference, and this is done.
I think, to that point, I think this probably ends with ESPN and Fox cutting checks to teams or programs like Wake Forest. and BC, just basically break up money, if you will, just to pay them to not sue.
Yeah, that's where I think that's where this is heading. But
Yeah,
that's still a bit farther away, and there's a lot of things. It's going to be the 12 team playoff expansion, Big Ten expansion next year. A lot of that's going to depend on that. And although it's fun to speculate on the ACC, technically nothing is happening yet. But it feels like at any moment something could happen, though. And I think that's kind of where this is exciting, though. But we'll move
yeah.
on to that.